The red Ferrari SF90 sat dead and immovable under the parking lot lights, sealing off every exit from the most expensive charity gala the city had seen in years. 3 engineers had already crouched over it, one by one. 3 engineers had already walked away. Giselle Vance, CEO of GV Motors, stood with her arms crossed beside the car her father gave her, her black high-collar dress catching the last of the night wind. She looked at the man standing nearby, wrinkled jacket, crooked tie, one hand holding a 6-year-old girl in a pink dress, and made a decision about him in under 3 seconds. He didn't belong here. Then she said the words, "Don't touch my car." He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He waited until she said otherwise. And 30 seconds after he finally opened that hood, the engine came back to life like something that had only been sleeping. Stay with this story. What happens next will stay with you long after the last word. Liam Harwell stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6 in the evening and fought with a tie he had not worn in 2 years. The silk was navy, a little faded at the edges, and it had been knotted by someone else the last time he wore it. He could not remember the exact way she had done it. He tried 3 times, got something close, and left it slightly off-center because getting it right felt like it would cost him something he could not afford to spend tonight. Bonnie came in at a run, her pink dress flaring around her knees, her dark hair braided in 2 uneven pigtails that Liam had done himself that morning with a tutorial playing on his phone. She held up a piece of paper crayon on white construction paper, bright and enormous and joyful. In it, a red car flew above a cloud. Beside it, 2 stick figures, one tall and one very small, looked up at the sky. "That's you and me, Daddy," Bonnie said. As though he might not have known, he looked at the drawing longer than he needed to. 2 years earlier, Claire Harwell had come home from a Tuesday errand and never made it through the front door. A driver who ran a red light. An intersection that had no reason to be the last one. Liam had been at his desk at Nexagen Dynamics when the call came in, and he had not been able to sit at that desk again after it, not because he was fired, because the blueprints on his screen were ones Claire had laughed over with him. Questioned. Improved. The desk faced a window she used to tap twice on her way past every morning, 2 knuckles on glass, just to say she knew he was there. He had packed his things on a Wednesday. He'd taken Bonnie to pre-K on Thursday. On Friday, he had opened a one-man garage on Clement Street under the name Harwell & Sons, which was just him and the hope of what Bonnie might choose to be someday. He lifted the drawing from Bonnie's hands and held it carefully. "I'm going to frame this one," he said. Bonnie grabbed her stuffed bear from the counter, a tan bear named Hazel, with one ear that had been restitched by Liam using a sewing kit meant for dress shirts, and tucked it under her arm. "What's a gala, Daddy?" Liam helped her toward the door. "It's a party for people with more money than they know what to do with. Are we those people?" He turned off the bathroom light. "We have each other. That's enough." They took the 2011 Civic. Bonnie sat in back with Hazel on her lap and watched the city go by, pointing at things she found interesting, which was most things. Liam drove in the quiet way. He always drove both hands on the wheel, eyes working the intersections, mind running 2 steps ahead of the traffic. It was a habit from the Nexagen years, when he used to map routes in his head the way other people counted sheep. The Harrington Grand came into view at 20 minutes past 7, and Liam felt the familiar, low-grade awareness that he was the wrong kind of person for this kind of place. A valet in white gloves opened his door. The cars parked along the curved front drive were the kind with names he used to read about in trade publications, not for the price, but for the engineering. A Bentley Flying Spur, a Mercedes AMG GT, and at the very end of the row, parked where the light from the overhead lamps hit it at the exact right angle, a Ferrari SF90 Stradale in Rosso Corsa red. Bonnie saw it first. She pressed her face against the window glass. "Daddy, that car is the color of fire." Liam stopped walking. He stood on the flagstone drive and looked at the car the way a person looks at something they once knew very well. He had spent 6 months at Nexigen, working with Ferrari's hybrid integration team on the SF series platform. He knew the architecture of that car, the way he knew the floor plan of his own house. Every module, every relay, every thermal threshold. He didn't know that in a few hours it would ask something of him he hadn't asked of himself in 2 years. Inside the ballroom, Aaron Wells found them within 5 minutes. Aaron was 55, gray at the temples, and moved through charity events with the comfortable authority of someone who had organized many of them. He and Liam's father, David Harwell, co-founder of Nexigen before Liam had joined the team, had worked side by side for nearly a decade. Aaron had been one of the few people who came to both funerals in those terrible 4 years, and he had been the one to mail Bonnie's contest invitation to the garage on Clement. "You came," Aaron said, shaking Liam's hand with both of his. "Bonnie won," Liam said. "She deserved to be here." Aaron crouched down to Bonnie's level and shook Hazel's paw with great seriousness. Bonnie approved of this enormously. Giselle Vance emerged from the hotel's main doors at 9:47, just as the formal portion of the evening ended, and the guests began moving toward the valet queue. She moved quickly, the way she always did, phone in her left hand, showing 3 missed calls from Dominic Carr, her CFO. She looked at his name and put the phone into her bag without calling back. She was 28 years old and had been CEO of GV Motors for 18 months, since the day her father, Gerald Vance, had died with more debts than anyone expected, and more faith in his daughter than most people thought was warranted. Gerald had built the company from a garage, not so different from the one on Clement Street. He had driven the SF90 off the dealership lot 6 weeks before his diagnosis, and he had spent the first afternoon of that ownership, driving nowhere in particular, just to hear it. Giselle had been in the passenger seat, eyes closed, listening. She walked to the car now, heels precise on the flagstone. She noticed, as she passed, a man standing near the front row with a child asleep against his shoulder. The child wore a pink dress. The man's jacket was wrinkled. His tie was crooked. He held the child with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it alone for a long time. Giselle filed him under the category of people who had arrived with the wrong invitation and moved past. She sat behind the wheel. Press start. The dashboard lit up, then went dark. She pressed again. The display flickered and died. A third time. Nothing at all but silence. She sat very still for a moment. Then she got out and called for the hotel's technical team. The first engineer was a man named Jackson from the hotel's facilities crew. He was competent and careful, and he spent 20 minutes checking the battery voltage, the fuse box, the relay panel, all of it fine. He tried the starter relay twice. He checked for a parasitic drain. He found nothing he recognized as wrong, which was its own particular kind of wrong. He stood up from the wheel well, wiped his hands on a cloth, and told Giselle he thought the car needed to be towed to a proper shop. Giselle said she was not towing the car anywhere at 10 o'clock at night. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. It carried the tone of a person who has learned that volume is what you resort to when precision fails you. Jackson nodded, apologized in the careful way of a man who knows he is apologizing for reality rather than for himself, and left. Across the lot, Liam sat on a low stone bench with Bonnie half asleep on his lap. Hazel clutched to her chest. The Civic was blocked in by the Ferrari. He was not in a hurry. He watched Jackson walk away and turned his attention back to the car. The dashboard display through the windshield was doing something specific each time Giselle pressed start. A flicker, a pattern of dying light that most people would read as a dead battery or a failed starter motor, or any number of things that had a physical cause and a physical solution. Liam read it differently. He had seen that exact pattern once before, in a test bay briefing document he had reviewed at 3 in the morning during a product integration sprint. Claire had been asleep on the couch behind him. He could still remember the particular quality of the silence in that room. The hum of the climate system, the sound of her breathing, the blue light of the screen. He said nothing. He was not the kind of man who volunteered himself into rooms he hadn't been invited into. Aaron came back and sat beside him, watching the scene with mild concern. "That's Giselle Vance," Aaron said quietly. "GV Motors. That Ferrari was her father's last gift to her." Liam looked at the car again. He thought about what that meant, not as a piece of information but as a weight. The last gift. The thing left behind by someone who could no longer give anything else. The second engineer arrived within 20 minutes, Isaac, a GV Motors technical staff member that Dominic Carr had dispatched from across town. Isaac brought a laptop and an OBD2 scanner, and the confidence of someone who had diagnosed problems from a screen for many years. He connected the scanner, pulled a code pressure fault, fuel system, and announced the fuel pump had likely failed. Giselle looked at him with the patience of someone who has learned to wait out the wrong answer. "The fuel pump does not fail in 3 hours," she said. Isaac defended his diagnosis. Giselle thanked him and told him to call for additional support. On the bench, Bonnie woke briefly, squinted at the Ferrari, and spoke into Liam's shoulder. "Did they fix it yet, Daddy?" "Not yet. Do you know what's wrong?" Liam watched Isaac disconnect his scanner. "I think so." Bonnie thought about this. "Then why don't you help?" He looked at the car. Then at Giselle, standing with her arms folded, her face composed into the expression of someone who was not going to let anyone see how tired she was. Then at his shoes, black Oxfords he had polished that afternoon for the first time in months. "They haven't needed me yet," he said. But Bonnie was already looking back at the car, and in the complete unself-consciousness of a 6-year-old, she had already decided what the right thing was, and she was simply waiting for the rest of the world to reach the same conclusion. The second engineer was named Isaac, a GV Motors staff technician that Dominic Carr had dispatched from across town. Isaac arrived with a laptop bag over one shoulder, an OBD2 diagnostic scanner under his arm, and the brisk confidence of someone who had solved 1,000 problems from a screen. He introduced himself to Giselle, connected his hardware to the car's diagnostic port, and set the scanner running. A fault code came back in under 3 minutes. He looked at it, looked at Giselle, and said, "Fuel system pressure fault. Most likely, the high-pressure pump. It can fail intermittently under certain thermal cycling conditions, especially in a hybrid, with a warm-cold start sequence in high ambient heat." Giselle looked at the code on his screen. Then she looked at him. "I drove here from the west side. 40 minutes of highway. The fuel pressure was fine the entire way." Isaac acknowledged this, but suggested the fault could have been accumulating. That intermittent failures sometimes presented only at rest. He was not incompetent. He was working with the tools he had and the experience they represented. And those tools said one thing. He did not have the experience that would have let him hear what the tools were not saying. Giselle thanked him and told him to call someone who specialized in this specific platform. Her tone was the kind that does not invite discussion. Isaac stepped away to make the call. And for a long moment, Giselle stood alone beside the car, looking at nothing in particular, the engine silent. The parking lot thinning out around her. Dominic Carr stood at the far edge of the lot, with a phone pressed to his ear, his back partly turned, watching the Ferrari with the steady attention of someone keeping track of something they have a stake in. The third engineer came in a black SUV. His name was Christian, and he wore a Ferrari-branded jacket over a pressed shirt and carried a tool case that had been designed for this specific line of automobiles. A few remaining guests drifted toward the edges of the lot to watch. Christian worked with precision and care. He checked the hybrid battery pack, the high-voltage inverter, the electric motor coupling, all of it in perfect mechanical order. He climbed in and attempted to interface with the ECU directly. But the module was not responding to external queries in the way it should if the problem were software accessible from a standard port. He checked for a ground fault. He ran a secondary voltage test on the 12-volt system. He went through his procedure the way a trained person goes through a procedure thoroughly, in order, without skipping. He stood, closed his tool case, and told Giselle that the ECU would need to be replaced or reset in a certified facility with proprietary diagnostic hardware. He could not do it here. He could arrange for a flatbed in the morning. Giselle did not answer for a moment. Her hand came up and rested on the hood of the car, flat-palmed, in the way a person rests a hand on something they are afraid of losing. The metal was still warm from the drive-in. She was 12 years old again, in the front seat of a different car, her father explaining something about the engine, with the patient enthusiasm of someone who had never learned to talk about what he felt, but had always known how to talk about what he built. He had described carburetors to her once as lungs. He had described transmissions as conversations between parts that didn't share a language. She had not followed all of it, but she had followed the affection in it, the way a person follows music in a language they don't speak. The SF-90 was the last of that, the last tangible thread between her and the man who had handed her a company and a silence, and expected her to build something from both. She was not going to cry in this parking lot. She had decided that 18 months ago, on the day she sat in the chair her father used to occupy and looked out at the same view, and felt nothing she was prepared to describe. She was not going to do that. Christian was already on his phone arranging the tow. Dominic materialized beside her, smooth as smoke. "Giselle, let me get you a car. This one needs a shop." His voice was warm, in the practiced way of someone who had learned warmth as a professional tool. "You've had a long night." "I'm fine, Dominic. You always say that." He held her gaze a beat too long, then moved away. Aaron Wells, still at the bench, leaned toward Liam and spoke quietly. "3 engineers," he said. "I know. The ECU isn't the problem. Not the hardware." Liam looked at Aaron. Aaron looked back at him with the expression of a man who had spent 55 years learning which silences to break. "Liam," he said, "you built that system." Bonnie tugged at Liam's sleeve. She said nothing. She just looked at him with her mother's eyes, the ones that had never once asked him to be anything other than what he was. He stood up. He settled Bonnie carefully onto the bench with Hazel beside her. "Stay right here," he said. "I'll be back in a minute." Bonnie nodded and wrapped both arms around the bear and watched him go. Liam walked across the parking lot at an unhurried pace. He stopped 2 meters from the Ferrari and looked at Giselle directly. She saw him coming and registered the same thing she had registered the first time: the jacket, the tie, the absence of credentials. She said nothing. He said, "May I take a look?" Giselle studied him. "Who are you?" "Liam Harwell. I'm here with my daughter. She won your hospital's art contest." He let a small pause sit there. "I used to be an engineer." She glanced toward Christian, who was still on his phone. Then back. "What kind?" "Hybrid drive systems." This platform specifically, something shifted in her expression but didn't resolve into anything he could read. She shook her head once, slowly. "Don't touch my car." Liam held her gaze for exactly the length of time it takes to decide something. Then he said, "All right." And he turned and walked back. Bonnie watched him return. Her chin came up. She said no? She said no. Oh. She was quiet for a moment then. "Is she still sad?" Liam looked back. Giselle was standing alone beside the car. Christian had moved further away to take a second call. Dominic was watching from the far corner, with his phone still in his hand. The remaining valets stood near the booth, waiting for direction no one was giving them. "Yeah," Liam said. "She is," Bonnie said, very simply. "You always help people who are sad, Daddy." He looked at his daughter for a long time. He thought about the garage on Clement, and the hours he kept, and the reason he kept them. He thought about a car that a dying man had bought for his daughter so she would have something to put her hands on when the world got too abstract. He thought about how it felt to lose the thing that connected you to someone you couldn't get back. He stood up again. He took off his jacket and laid it over the bench. He walked back across the lot. Giselle was on her phone when she saw him coming a second time. She ended the call and turned to face him with the measured patience of someone who has learned to give people exactly one more chance. Liam stopped a meter away. "I know what's wrong with it," he said. "Not as a claim, as a fact that happened to be available." A long pause. "Then say it. The ECU has fallen into thermal fail-safe lockout. The pressure sensor is reading 0 because the module was interrupted mid-cycle in high ambient heat. The car is protecting itself from a fault that isn't there. Nothing is broken." He said it simply and without theater. "But you need to know the reset procedure to get it out. It's not in the standard service manual. It was added in an internal bulletin after the first production run." Giselle stared at him. 3 engineers were looking at the hardware. "The hardware's fine." The silence between them had a different quality now. It wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of someone recalculating. She looked toward the bench where a small girl in a pink dress sat holding a tan bear, watching the parking lot with the calm patience of a child who had learned that waiting was something her father did well, which meant she could do it too. Giselle looked back at Liam. She exhaled, and it was not quite a sigh, and not quite a surrender. It was the sound of a decision being made. "Show me." Liam walked to the driver's side door. He did not ask for permission to sit down. He opened the door and lowered himself into the seat. The interior of the SF-90 smelled faintly of leather and something else, cedar maybe. Or the particular scent of old driving gloves, left in a glove box for a long time. He did not look at the dashboard immediately. He looked at the ECU status indicator through the lower edge of the instrument cluster. The module pilot light was cycling at a 3-second interval lit, dark, with the mechanical patience of something broadcasting a signal no one had yet decoded. He had seen that precise cycle in a briefing document at Nexogen, in a section on theoretical edge case failures that most of his team had dismissed as too unlikely to prepare for. He had written the case number down anyway. He placed his left hand on the left paddle shifter. He placed his right hand over the start button. He held them both down simultaneously. 1 second. The cluster lit up fully and went dark. 2 seconds. A small relay clicked from somewhere behind the dash, neat and clean. A single mechanical syllable. 3 seconds. The pilot light stopped its cycle and held still. 4 seconds. Liam released both contacts. He pressed start. The Ferrari SF-90 Stradale came back to life the way a large, sleeping animal comes back to life, not with a sputter, not with a cough, but with a single full-throated note that filled the entire parking lot and bounced back off the stone facade of the Harrington Grand. Not a startup sound. A return. Something resuming from where it had been interrupted, with no acknowledgement that there had ever been an interruption at all. On the bench 20 meters away, Bonnie Harwell sat up straight and her eyes went wide. The bear fell sideways on the stone. She didn't pick it up. She just watched the red car and said, in a voice that carried clearly across the quiet lot, "Daddy did it." Not a question. An announcement. Liam stepped out of the car. He picked up his jacket from the bench on the way back and pulled it on. He stood in front of Giselle and said 2 words. "It's done." Giselle did not move for 3 full seconds. Her hand came up again to the hood, same place as before. Flat-palmed, but the car was running now, warm and steady beneath her fingers, and the thing she had been afraid of losing was still there. Christian had turned from his call. He walked over slowly, looking at the running car the way a craftsman looks at a repair he would have been proud to make himself. He said, "What did you do?" Liam told him about the thermal fail-safe, the reset sequence, the internal bulletin from the first production year. He said it in the same flat and precise way he would have said it to a peer in a conference room. Christian took out his phone and typed notes without embarrassment. Aaron Wells appeared at Liam's shoulder. He shook his hand without saying anything, which said considerably more. Giselle turned from the car. She looked at Liam not the way she had looked at him when he first walked over, not with the quick appraisal of a woman deciding what category to file someone under. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at the few things in her life that turned out to be more than they appeared. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. "I spent 4 years working with Ferrari's hybrid integration team. Through Nexigen Dynamics. I led the SF Series platform group." Giselle knew the name Nexigen Dynamics. Her father had tried to acquire the company 3 years before his diagnosis, and the deal had fallen through because Nexigen had declined twice. She knew the company produced some of the best hybrid drive work in the industry. She did not know, until this moment, that the man who had been running the technical side of that work was the same man currently standing in a parking lot in a wrinkled jacket with a crooked tie because he had driven his daughter to a children's hospital fundraiser and gotten blocked in by her car. "You left Nexigen," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Bonnie, who had retrieved Hazel, and was walking toward them at the careful pace of a child who does not want to interrupt. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said. "She and I built that work together. After she was gone, I couldn't be in that building anymore. It still had her in it." Giselle held very still. "So I opened a garage," he said. "It lets me work until 4. I pick Bonnie up at 3:30. I don't fly out on Tuesdays. I don't take calls after 7. He glanced at his daughter, who had stopped a few feet away and was looking up at the Ferrari with a reverence ordinarily reserved for very tall buildings and birthday cakes. "I can't be the best engineer in the city and be a good enough father at the same time. I chose the second one." Giselle heard something in that sentence that she wasn't going to say out loud. Her father had chosen differently. He had been brilliant and driven and had built something from nothing, and she had grown up in a house that was full of his achievement and quiet with his absence. She didn't resent him for it. She had just learned what the cost of that kind of choosing looked like from the other side. "Your father founded Nexigen," she said. It wasn't a question. She had looked it up once, the Harwell name, when she'd been researching the acquisition history. "He did. He died 2 years before my wife. 4 years, 3 losses." He said it simply, without asking for anything in return. Aaron knew him. Aaron, standing nearby, nodded once. Bonnie reached Giselle's side and looked up at her. "Your car is really pretty," she said. "It sounds like a lion when it wakes up." Giselle looked down at the girl. The composed expression she wore for boardrooms and charity galas and conversations with Dominic Carr softened around its edges in a way that would have surprised anyone who knew her professionally. "Thank you," she said. "I think so too." She had not noticed Dominic moving until he was already beside her, placing himself into the conversation the way he always did with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 20 years deciding which moments to enter. "Giselle," he said. "Quite a night. You should get home." His voice carried the warmth of old familiarity, and the edge of someone reminding you who has been there longest. "I'm fine, Dominic. You said that before. I meant it both times." Dominic turned to Liam with a smile that lived only in the upper portion of his face. "Impressive work. Where did you say you work now?" "Harwell and Sons. Clement Street. From Nexigen to a street garage." He let the words settle with the careful neutrality of someone who wants the comparison to do its own damage. Interesting life choices. Liam looked at him the way a man looks at a trap he has no interest in stepping into. "Depends what you're optimizing for," he said. Dominic held the smile another moment, then excused himself. He walked 20 paces away, turned his back, and made a call. Aaron watched him go. Then he moved close to Liam and spoke in a register low enough that only Liam could hear. "The GV Motors board has been approached about an acquisition of Nexigen. Last month. Not by Giselle, by Dominic. He's offering 40% below market value." Liam looked at Aaron without expression. Nexigen has been struggling financially since you and the other senior team members left. Dominic knows this. He's been patient about it the way that certain kinds of people are patient, not because they are calm, but because they are waiting for the right moment to move. Aaron paused, chose his words. He was standing in this parking lot before Giselle's car died. I noticed him near the Ferrari, before the guests came out. Looking at it. Longer than made sense. Liam turned this over. He looked at the ECU housing through the open hood from where he stood. The thermal fail-safe lockout on the SF-90 was a software state, but it required a physical catalyst to trigger a deliberate interruption to the temperature sensor during a shutdown cycle. Someone who had access to the Nexigen Ferrari integration files, which Dominic would have reviewed during acquisition research, would know the mechanism. Someone who knew where to place a heat source against the ECU sensor housing for 3 minutes while the car sat in the lot, before the guests came out, would leave no mechanical damage, no visible trace. The car would simply refuse to start, and every engineer dispatched to it would open the hood and look at the parts that were fine, and never think to ask why the software believed a lie. Christian, called by Dominic. Arriving, even before Isaac had formally given up. Called ahead of time, as though someone already knew that Isaac would fail. I need to look at the ECU housing again, Liam said. He walked back to the car. He used the flashlight on his phone and crouched beside the open hood. The ECU module cover had 4 recessed bolts. 3 of them had the undisturbed surface of factory assembly. The 4th had a faint radial mark, the kind left by a flathead used in place of the correct Torx bit, applied in a hurry. It was not a mark from Christian or from Isaac. Neither of them had touched this housing. The mark was fresh. Liam stood up and photographed it. He looked at the image for a moment, then walked back to where Giselle was standing. "There's something you need to see," he said, "and I'd like Dominic Carr to hear it." Something in his voice made her not ask why. She called Dominic over with a short gesture. Liam showed her the photograph. He explained the thermal trigger method, the vulnerability, the physical access required. The fact that a person needed to know the SF series architecture in detail, to know it was even possible. He said it in the measured way of someone presenting a technical finding. Not an accusation. He said the interpretation was hers. Giselle looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at Dominic. Dominic kept the smile. "That's a significant accusation from someone who runs a garage." Liam's expression did not change. "It's an observation from someone who designed this system. The interpretation is up to the CEO." Dominic tried another angle. He turned to Giselle with something that almost resembled hurt. "After everything I've done for this company, after everything, I was to your father. My father didn't trust you," Giselle said. Her voice was even and clear. "He kept you because you were useful, and because you knew things he couldn't afford to have you take somewhere else. He told me that." Those exact words. The week before he died, she held his gaze without blinking. "I'll have our legal team contact you in the morning. Good night, Dominic." Something moved through Dominic Carr's expression, not shock, because he was too careful for shock, but a recalibration. He had not accounted for this particular variable. He had not accounted for Liam Harwell, or for the way a 6-year-old girl sitting on a stone bench with a stuffed bear had looked at her father, until he stood up and did the right thing. He straightened his cuffs, nodded once, and walked to his car. Aaron watched him go. He exhaled. "I've been waiting 2 years for that." Giselle stood beside the running Ferrari and looked at Liam. The parking lot was nearly empty. The valets were in their booth. Christian had left. The city beyond the hotel drive was doing its ordinary nighttime business, indifferent to what had just happened in this particular rectangle of paved ground. She said, "I owe you an apology." He said, "You gave me one already." That was a polite apology. "This is a real one." She paused. I saw what you were wearing, and I decided what you were. That was wrong. I do it less than I used to, but I still do it, and tonight it was wrong." Liam looked at her for a moment. "I've been doing this long enough that I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be." A quiet settled between them that was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who have gotten past the part of the conversation that required pretending. Then Giselle said, "I need a technical advisor, specifically for hybrid drive systems. Contract basis, flexible hours, remote when possible. Not board meetings, and not press events, actual engineering consultation." She said it the way she said most things, directly and without apology for wanting it. "I need someone who understands this platform at the architecture level, not someone who read about it in a service bulletin." Liam looked at Bonnie, who had drifted back to the car and placed one small hand flat against the driver's door. The same gesture her father had watched Giselle make twice tonight, pressed against the hood. Bonnie looked at him across the lot, with the patient expression of a child who has decided the outcome already and is just waiting for the adult to catch up. "What are the hours like?" he said. "Yours," Giselle said. "I know what time you pick up your daughter." Liam was quiet for a moment. The engine ran beneath Bonnie's hand, warm and steady. "I'll think about it," he said. Giselle nodded once. She did not push. The Civic was brought around 5 minutes later by a valet who apologized for the wait, with the sincerity of someone who had watched the whole evening unfold from a respectful distance and felt obscurely moved by it. Liam helped Bonnie into her car seat and buckled Hazel in beside her with the same care he gave to everything that mattered to him, methodical, unhurried, complete. He put on his jacket. He reached up and straightened his tie, got it almost right, then let it sit where it wanted to sit. There were some things that did not cooperate, and it was fine. He walked around to the driver's side. Bonnie turned her face toward the Ferrari as the Civic moved through the lot toward the exit. The red car sat in its space, engine idling, its running lights casting a low, warm glow onto the flagstone. Giselle stood beside it with one hand on the roof, looking not at the Civic but at the hotel facade, or at the sky, or at something entirely interior that had no address. "She's not sad anymore," Bonnie said. Liam pulled the Civic onto the main road. The city opened ahead of them, traffic lights in their regular intervals, the low amber wash of street lamps, the particular hum of pavement under tires that only exists late at night when most of the world has gone quiet. "No," he said. "She's not. Because you fixed the car?" He thought about it for a moment. About what it meant to fix something, and what it meant to lose something, and the difference between those two states, and the distance between them. "Because the car's still hers," he said. "She was afraid she was losing it. Now she knows she's not." Bonnie considered this in the careful way she considered things that were large. "But you fixed it. The car," he said. "Other things fix themselves, once you let them." Bonnie did not fully understand this, and she was old enough to know she didn't, so she held Hazel closer and watched the city go by without pressing for more. She was asleep before the second red light. Liam drove through the streets in the specific quiet that only exists when a child is asleep in the back seat, the quiet of being trusted completely, of being the only fixed point in someone else's world, of carrying that responsibility in both hands and not spilling a drop. He did not know yet whether he would call Giselle Vance. He did not know whether the work he had done tonight was its own complete thing, self-contained and sufficient, or whether it was the beginning of something else. He didn't need to decide that now. He needed to get Bonnie home, get her shoes off without waking her, carry her to the bed with the yellow comforter, tuck Hazel in beside her, and then sit for a while at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold before he went to sleep. He needed to do the small and necessary things that the day asked of him. The streetlights moved across the windshield in slow amber intervals, one after another, each one throwing a bar of light across the back seat and across Bonnie's face, and across the bear with the re-stitched ear. Liam watched the road ahead. He thought about the sound of an engine coming back to life, that single full note, unhesitant, as if the interruption had been a minor inconvenience, and the machine had simply been waiting for someone to ask it the right question. He had not fixed anything tonight to be seen. He had not done it to prove something to a woman who had told him not to touch her car, or to a man in a well-pressed suit who thought that where a person worked was the same as what a person was worth. He had done it because a car that mattered to someone was sitting silent when it should have been running, and he happened to know why, and he happened to still be standing there. That was the whole of it. Nothing more complicated than that. Nothing less. Some things are enough simply because they are true.